Hey there, my name is Kayla, and I am one of the co-founders of the nonprofit K9 Conservationists, which is an organization that trains dogs to detect scat, plants, mussels, pathogens, those sorts of things, primarily for biologists trying to do their research. We run a really cool course on the topic, and we spend most of our time traveling the US and the rest of the world helping biologists do really important conservation work. And today I wanted to answer a couple questions that we got from a student who is interested in getting into this line of work. And rather than just responding privately to her message, I wanted to just record a full response and then also share it with any of you who may have similar questions about this line of work. So we're going to start out with the first question, which is how did I first hear about conservation detection dogs and what made me decide that it was something I wanted to pursue? So I first heard about conservation detection dogs when I was probably a junior in college. I had been working as a dog trainer for a couple of years at this point, kind of on the side to pay my way through college, and was getting a degree in ecology and conservation at Colorado College. So I already had these two separate interests. And a friend who knew that I was interested in both things saw a really cool YouTube video, sent it over to me, and I pretty much immediately was like, oh my God, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. And there were a bunch of reasons for that. It is one of those jobs, Sniffler, one of my two working dogs, and Farley's right here. Um, and there was a couple reasons that it really appealed to me. So one, as I was working my way through my degree in ecology, I was really focused on trying to find a job that wouldn't get me stuck behind a desk. So I didn't necessarily want to specialize in like GIS or coding or database management or anything like that. I really wanted to be able to continue working outside and in the field. I also realized that as the field of ecology and conservation has progressed, those books that I read about Jane Goodall having these really intense one-on-one relationships where she truly knew her chimpanzees was not something that I was likely to get anywhere in my career. And that bummed me out. I was an animal lover, a huge animal nerd. But at the same time, I wasn't super convinced about wanting to work exclusively with dogs. I didn't really want to be a professional dog trainer for the rest of my life. Um, I did end up doing it professionally for several years. We'll get to that in a moment. But I'm really, really passionate about conservation and global biodiversity loss and deforestation and these sorts of things. And that's really kind of my driving motivator for everything in this life. Which means that I just didn't see myself wanting to be a professional dog trainer for the rest of my life, which is something that people were asking me a lot at the time, like, why don't you just do the dog training thing? Why do you want to do conservation so badly? So when I heard about the conservation dog world, I was like, great, this is going to get me outside because it can't be 100% a desk job if you've got to work with dogs. I get to have that really close one-on-one relationship with the dogs that I'm working with, even if I never run into my study species. And I get to put all of this dog training to use and really get to work on something that I love doing for the purpose of conservation. So it's not just training pet dogs. So I knew that right away. And then from there, I spent several years emailing other organizations, trying to get internships, trying to volunteer, and I ran into brick wall after brick wall after brick wall. Nobody would take me on. Nobody was accepting volunteers or interns. It's a very small field and there is a ton of interest in it. So there just weren't many ways to get into the field, which is why K9 Conservationists created our course now. This is why we offer this, because we're so passionate about helping more people have a smoother path to getting involved in the fight for conservation and against global biodiversity loss. It's something that's really important to us, and we know how hard it is. Not just me, my two co-founders, Rachel and Heather, had similar experiences. So it took me about 3, maybe 4 years between first hearing about conservation detection dogs and then finally getting the job. I cover my personal journey in a lot more detail in a couple different podcast episodes. So we've got the K9 Conservationist podcast. If you just kind of search for K9 Conservationist podcast, how to get into the field of conservation detection dogs on any of your favorite podcasting apps, you'll find that episode and you can listen to the whole thing there. So then the next question is, for someone who wanted to get into this field, what kind of experiences would you recommend? Is it better to have more dog experience or more field experience or a mixture of both? Both is the very short answer. Any experience that you can get handling high drive, high intensity, high energy dogs in particular is going to be useful. These dogs, I know my dogs are not looking at like it now, but we did a lot of training this morning. These dogs can be a lot to work with and a lot to live with. So it's good to get experience with that first. But also, you do really need that field experience. You need to feel comfortable managing a GPS, driving on rough, muddy roads, navigating off trail. All of those sorts of things are really, really useful. So it's definitely a both sort of answer. Now, three is a question kind of particular for me, is what made you want to get a graduate degree? Do you know others who work primarily with conservation dogs who have a graduate degree? What kind of projects or benefits do you see for the graduate degree in the future? So I do know a couple people who have graduate degrees in this field. So Simone Gadbois, who's up at Dalhousie University in Nova Scotia, Canada, he is a professor. Dr. Megan Parker, who was one of the co-founders of Working Dogs for Conservation, has a PhD. At least one of the other co-founders at Working Dogs for Conservation has a PhD. Dr. Caroline Finlay, who's over in Northern Ireland, has a PhD. There's several of us, but not everyone. You definitely do not need a graduate or PhD a graduate degree or a PhD to be in this line of work. Definitely not necessary. For me, where it came about is that I am really interested. I mean, I love networking. I love learning. I love being in school. So I've always wanted to go back and get a PhD. And that's just something that I've always been really driven to do. And I knew I would enjoy, which I think is really, really important. I also know that I'm getting a ton of networking and kind of street cred through not just my time in school and the connections I'm making here, but also, quite frankly, by having those letters behind my name. And I'm learning a ton about study design, scientific inquiry, how to direct and manage these field sites. You know, there's so much that I'm learning through this PhD that I wouldn't get by just being a field tech and just helping out on these long-term projects. It's really preparing me to be able to ask my own questions, design my own studies, get my own grants, and really be more of a scientist in my own right versus the person who shows up with the dogs and collects the data, which there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. I love that side of the job. But I knew that I personally wanted something a little bit different long-term, ultimately. And it opens some other doors as well. If I ever decide that this field isn't right for me, I've got the degree in ecology. I can go and do something else. And then as far as what kind of projects or benefits do I see, I guess I've covered the benefits. My PhD, I'm focusing on two main projects. So both projects focus on using the detection dogs to collect scat of apex predators in fragmented landscapes. And then we're going to be using that scat to determine movement and connectivity of those apex predators. So we can figure out who's pooping where, and therefore, if you pooped there, you were there. Which will kind of show us where they're moving across the landscape and what areas are connected in a way. And diet. So we can figure out what they're eating through their poop. So the two areas that I'm going to be working in, one is with wolves in Southeast Alaska. So in the Alexander Archipelago, the area around Prince of Wales Island. We're working on the wolves there. It's going to be really cool. I'm gearing up for that fieldwork in just a couple months now. And then I'm also currently grant writing and fundraising for the other half of my PhD, which is going to be focusing on pumas, primarily in El Salvador, but the dogs are also cross-trained on all of the other wild felids that exist in El Salvador and a couple of the canids. So we'll all, and actually even some of the mustelids. So we'll be primarily focusing on pumas, but the dogs will be collecting scats from ocelot, margay, jaguarundi, tayra. Jaguars are not known to exist in El Salvador, but there is the chance that in a preserve or a wild area near a border, we might find something like that. That'd be cool. So that's the plan. Then number 4 here, we've got what are some skills that have been helpful, but aren't necessarily school related. For me, some of the big ones that have come up have been communications and outreach, being comfortable running a podcast, running a course, doing these YouTube videos. All of this helps a ton get our names out there and helps us get work, helps us get clients, helps us make connections, make friends. All of that is super duper helpful. So those soft personal skills and communication and outreach skills, education, those sorts of things. For me personally, another one that I've really enjoyed and have gotten a ton of benefit from is speaking fluent Spanish. I'm planning on building a significant part of my career working in Central America, potentially South America as well, but really focused on Central America right now. So being fluent in that language is really, really important if I want to be able to work down there. And then there's all sorts of other stuff. Driving stick is really helpful because especially if you're working internationally, a lot of field vehicles are going to be manual. Being comfortable driving on rough, muddy, icy, potholed, sketchy roads. Um, Dog field care and field first aid. I took a wilderness first responder course about 10 years ago, and I take my recertification every time it comes up, and that's super duper important to me. It does cost money, and it is a class, but it's not academic school. Um, Oh, what else? It really kind of depends on what you want to be working on, honestly. There's also a ton of dog stuff that you could do that isn't necessarily school related, but all of these webinars, like this weekend, one of my plans is to work through a webinar from the K9 Census Foundation, which is Robin Grubel in Iowa, USA, on search strategies and large area searches. I'm super excited about that. It's just a 4 hour, mini course that I'm going to be taking online. So tons and tons of options. It really kind of depends on what you want to be focusing on. Within my two co-founders and myself, I'm the one who's most focused on the communications and outreach. Heather does a lot of the dog training and education side of things, and Rachel is doing a lot of our data management, business management, those sorts of things, which, like, thank God, because I hate those things. So it's really nice to have a team as well. If you don't have a team and you end up going this entrepreneurial route, which many of us do because there aren't many full-time jobs that you can just get hired for and then have a salary and work in, then, having a team for entrepreneurship is really, really helpful because we get to share the load on some of those sorts of things. So our last question here, number 5, is, are there differences you see between someone who wants to work as a contractual dog handler and someone who wants to be a scientist that primarily uses conservation dogs as their research method? Yes, absolutely. So I think I am personally kind of moving in the route of the second option, being a scientist who primarily uses conservation dogs as the research method. And that's why I'm going to school. Or one of the reasons is because I really want to be able to design my own research projects, think through my own questions, my own hypotheses, come up with the methodology, write the paper, get the publication, make the impact. That's something that I really want to do in my career. And that is different. I think if my end goal was to just continue being a contractual dog handler where, we get the project, they tell us what they want us to search for, we train the dogs, we show up, and then at the end we hand off all of our equipment and our data sheets and our sample bags, and then we go on to the next project. I don't think if that was my goal, I would be getting this PhD. Nothing wrong with either option. I love doing the field work and I love getting to just show up and run my dogs and then leave. And there are lots of successful organizations that do that sort of work. Rogue detection teams, Conservation Dogs Collective, New York, New Jersey Trail Conference is a little bit more monitoring based, Science Dogs of New England. I think all of them would kind of fit more in that first model versus what I'm really interested in is a little bit different. And I think like Chiron K9, which is Paul Bunker down in Texas, he does a little bit of both, and he does not, to my knowledge, have a PhD. And I think I would know. We're kind of good friends at this point. I really, really admire him and his work. So even if that is the route that you want to go, I don't think the PhD is the only way to get there. It's just the way that made sense for me. So I hope this is helpful. I hope it's not just helpful for our question asker, but also for any of you who have any of these sorts of questions and are considering the world of conservation detection dogs. Again, our website is K9Conservationists.org, letter K number 9. We have a free podcast with hundreds of episodes, and we have a course. So check all of that out on our website. And if you have any more questions to send me, feel free, and I might record another one of these.